My name is Daniel Tachik. I'm the Executive Director of the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm thrilled to be introducing our guest speaker today. But before I get into that, just a couple quick things about the Scott Institute in case you're not familiar. We're really just kind of the umbrella organization at the university that encompasses all things energy at the university. So we address the world's most pressing energy challenges by enabling research, strategic partnerships, policy outreach, entrepreneurship, and education. Part of that educational component is bringing in guest speakers to speak to all of you, educating us, making us more aware of what's happening out there, and really it's about educating the guest speakers as well. I know Austin in particular is interested in your feedback and your questions. He's a very humble person, very excited to learn, but he's also an extremely accomplished researcher and business person. I'll let him talk about all of that. So other ways to stay in touch with the Scott Institute, we have a generic email address. If you're not sure who to contact, email that email address. One of us will get it. We're also on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And then real quick, I just want to cover a couple of events. So next month on February 16th, we are partnering, the Scott Institute is partnering with the Department of Energy to host the Energy Tech University Prize, or Energy Tech Up for short. So this is a business, a kind of a business plan competition. So if any of you have an interesting idea for an energy-related business, you don't even have to have a prototype, you don't have to have hardware, software, just it's a purely business focused, a business plan focused competition. So if you're interested in learning more about this event, please pull out your phones, take a scan of this QR code, and that'll take you to our event information. We're also very excited to be returning in person this year for CMU Energy Week. So we've had Energy Week 4 years in the past in person, and it's been a while for obvious reasons, but so we're returning in person March 21st through the 24th. This year we're going to be focusing solely on industrial decarbonization. So our big day of programming is going to be all about figuring out what are the biggest challenges and opportunities in removing greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial sector. So think steel making, cement production, chemical processing, etc. So we're very excited for that. Registration is opening very soon for that, but if you want to learn more, please scan this QR code and you'll be able to register very shortly. So, to kick things off with Austin. So, Austin is a friend of mine, but he's also an extremely, he has a lot of very interesting things to say. And in true Carnegie Mellon fashion, he is taking two topics that at least I, as a non-expert in these, at least one of these topics, colliding two very different topics together to make in an effort to make the world a better place. So, the intersection of energy finance and crypto and blockchain. I could not be more excited to hear about what he has to say. I'll just give you a quick rundown of his bio, but he went to the University of Dayton, go Flyers, I believe. Then he came here to CMU and he got his PhD in engineering and public policy back when it was over in Porter Baker. Now it's over here in Wien. And then he and I actually did a postdoc together where we measured methane gas emissions from the natural gas sector all across the country. He then went on to work for a couple of energy companies and gained a lot of perspective from the business side, from all these different angles. So I'm just going to leave it at that because he has much more interesting things to say than I do. But without further ado, Austin, please, welcome.
Hey. Hey, Daniel, thank you very much. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, everybody. Can folks hear me in the back okay? Okay, perfect. And I'll do my best. Oh, went to sleep, right? Yeah. Okay, so what I would definitely want to do today is go through. I've got this is obviously a very rich, kind of dense topic with something else happening. The sky is opening back here. You just can't see it. It's interesting. Well, anyway, so let me just start off by saying thanks for being here. And Daniel, thank you for the invite. It is truly a pleasure to spend this time with you, and I'm very excited for what he's going to do for the Scott Institute. I can't think of somebody who's going to be a better advocate and leader for this whole place. So I'm happy today to talk to you about towards the future of energy abundance. This is something that I'm very passionate about as really a mindset that we can take to the energy industry. But it's something that is not just going to happen. We have to think about what are the technologies, what are the ways to really think about energy today that can help sort of bring that future about. And you can sort of think about just generally the dialogue that takes place in energy. We go from scarcity to abundance. We have 1 billion people without access to electricity, but probably all of us waste electricity in our homes. So it's just a lot of different things that go on that are confusing. They don't make sense if you try to apply like rational market theories to some of this stuff. And what I find is that really it's technology and the way things that are moving are going to ultimately help us to achieve this vision for the future. But I think it's a vision that we all have to think about how can we support and get behind, because in a world where there is abundant energy, it is a better world. Energy is really the base layer of the economy, if you will. It's where human flourishing begins. And so that's why I'm excited about this topic and to dive more into it with you today. So a bit just on about me. So my dating profile is here on the left. In the middle are pictures of me and my 2 kids, Claire and Troy. Recently I took them skiing and on the Polar Express train, which was the absolute highlight for them of the year. And then on the far right is actually a recent screenshot. It was me and some of the folks that I graduated Carnegie Mellon with. We still stay in touch, figure out, depending where we are in the world at that time, what's the latest in life. But what's kind of cool about this is that, Daniel, he has his own startup in the energy space, Aperba, works in battery technology. Ennis had an energy startup, now is a medical startup. And then Stefan also works in the energy space, one of the leaders in methane emissions. So we've stayed close, but it's just sort of a testament to Carnegie Mellon and the bonds that you make, but also the people that you make here are going to go and do some really interesting things. So stay connected, and it'll be part of your network going forward. So then, Daniel touched on my, work experience a bit. So I just wanted to put up on the page kind of some of the details. Obviously, there's sort of more than I'm listing here, but what I wanted to say is, hey, here's what the topics were. And from an academic perspective, what was interesting to me was, the different ways in which my work kind of took me into. I didn't stay focused on one particular part of the energy industry. You can see it's everything from economics to the environment to human health related considerations. And then of course it's the last one listed there. That's where it has Daniel's name there, because that was the year that we spent on the road together measuring methane emissions. We could do a whole thing just on that year and how formative it was, I think, for us professionally, but also just that, as a relationship. There, you get to know somebody when you spend 10,000 miles in a van that it rattled. This van rattled because of all the equipment. And so just imagine day upon day of just constant rattling, and it made us appreciate each other a whole lot, for the fact that we could make it through all that together in one piece. Then, after spending the time in academia, I had actually kind of a fork in the road, deciding, do I want to stay in the academic, work for an NGO, or do I want to go to industry? And ultimately, I thought there was a huge opportunity for me to really sort of understand the business side of energy. And so I started working for an oil and gas producer here based in Canonsburg, so local here. And that was really sort of eye-opening when you start now talking about the dollars, the complexity of the projects, sort of a whole different appreciation for how the industry works. After that, then I moved to Columbus and I worked at a place called IGS Energy. Their bread and butter business is retail energy. So what that means is they're buying energy wholesale, selling at retail. I'm sure folks here get those letters in the mail, they know what I'm talking about. And then the previous 3 years before founding Synota, I was working for NiSource, which is a multi-state electric and gas utility. My role there was really focusing one side strategy, how are we going to plan the work over the next 5, 10, 20 years, but then on a daily basis, thinking about what are the overall risks in the company. And it's somewhere along the lines there that I started to understand and learn about Bitcoin specifically. What does this technology mean? Obviously thinking about the broader cryptocurrency landscape. But I was certainly very attracted to Bitcoin from the start for the fact that it has a really strong tie to the energy industry, and really sort of understanding that what those differences are, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I'm so Synota is a Bitcoin technology startup. I'm the co-founder and CEO of that today. And on this next screen, I just wanted to show, here is the full team. In terms of full-time employees, we actually just hired employee number 6. But we're, think of this presentation almost as like a snapshot in time. Maybe Synota will be a really big company one day, and you guys will say, hey, I saw them when they were pre-revenue, had just finished raising their money, and they were a team getting going, because that's really who we are. We are just getting going. We have, a working product today, and we're actively, getting that into customers' hands so that way we can start to grow. But still very early. So one of the things that I can tell you about, though, of where we are in the journey is just sort of the excitement that existed around, Synota and what our story was. Here we are, we're bringing together 2 industries, but we were raising money in what's, the bear market for cryptocurrency. So we had heard that not only is this difficult, but hey, this is, in your industry specifically, this is a really bad time to raise. But what is part of, the theme for this talk, but just generally important to recognize, is that the enthusiasm within the Bitcoin space has not diminished. Even though, there's been a lot of price movements, there's been things like FTX, we actually, had one of those sort of blessed experiences where almost every venture capital firm we talked to wanted to invest. So it was a pretty quick and painless process. I wish I could, give myself and the team the credit, but I think it's also just really the idea and, where are we trying to take technology and change the energy industry. I should say before I continue on, so now that's kind of all the background stuff. Now we're going to start getting a little bit more dense, thinking about, specifically connections to the industry, both crypto as well as energy. So if there are any questions along the way, I want to make sure, folks understand. I know Daniel's, we're going to leave some time for questions at the end too. But if there is something that I can help explain in the moment, please raise your hand. So all of that time that I've spent within the energy industry, the biggest thing that you can kind of think about is I've gotten to see the value chain. And so when I say the value chain, I'm talking about, I turned that off, Dan, we're good. That was me. I was trying to do the effect, but I didn't realize I was going to pull something else up. So the thing that I want to talk about is the value chain for energy. We're talking about where does it begin? It starts with the landowners who own the mineral rights, or the landowners in which the power plant's being sited. You're good. And it works then from power plants, oil wells, and then you're moving through pipeline systems. You're moving through transmission systems on the power side, distribution. You have all of these different elements of the value chain, companies along the way that are contributing to that. And so what people often don't realize is that there may be 5 or 10 companies that actually touch the molecule or touch the electron from source until when you consume it in your home or in your business. And so what's amazing, though, is how from a physical value chain perspective, these molecules and electrons, it's actually really efficient. We can produce gas in southwestern PA where we are today, and I can consume it in my home in a matter of days. And it will have touched all those companies. They'll have all the records of the gas moving through the pipeline. So we have a very efficient system. But where it's actually really interesting is when you think about the other elements of that value chain. Number one, there's the data that's being produced. How is that data being managed? There's value in data. But then there's also value in the actual payment for the energy itself. How is that moving? And so that's where we start to sort of unpack what I'll call is sort of a meta problem within the industry, the energy industry that is. And it's very disconnected. You have these 3 flows of value that largely are not integrated with one another. They're being managed independently by different departments, and it's all asynchronous, if you will. And so when we think about these, you can think of energy, data, and money just as flows, and they're rarely are they aligned. The example that I love to give is when I talk about just your own utility bill. So if you were to look and see, pick up your next utility bill, and you'll see that you're paying for energy that you consumed 30, 60, sometimes 90 days ago. And think of another product where you get to consume it and then not pay for it for that period of time. There's essentially the way to think about that is that's basically a loan to you, and that's kind of being represented. You get the bill at the end of 30 days, you have another 30 to 60 days sometimes to pay that bill. So there's a cost to that. There's no such thing as a free loan. And so within the space that we've been focused on, as we think about the financial inefficiency that comes from that, about 10% of the cost of your energy is just the fact that most energy transactions are done on credit. You get a product, you pay for it later. So if you can start to say, well, what if we change the way we transact so there's less credit in the system, then we can think of, large industrial customers don't have to post as much collateral. Credit risk, becomes less of a concern. So you start to sort of unwind a lot of infrastructure, departments, man hours that are being dedicated to managing a credit-based system if you can start to undo that a little bit. So this disconnect is really key to think then, well, why did people get really excited about blockchain? And so I actually remember it was in 2015, right around this time, this PwC paper came out, which was, sort of everybody read at the industry at that time when I first started hearing about blockchain applications for the energy space. And there's a list that's published by Blockchain for Energy. It's a think tank or a nonprofit, and they say, hey, if you have any one of these 5 things, you could be a candidate, for your energy application to use blockchain. And of course, when you look at the list, it's like in this complicated industry, everything they do could potentially be a candidate for blockchain because they have all of these disconnected flows, and they're having to share information with their regulators, with their counterparties. So if there was a way that we could organize this information, we could synchronize it, that would be a benefit. And so, it certainly is like, okay, well, blockchain has legs, there's opportunities here. And what I'm showing on this slide is that, yeah, there's a lot of companies working in this space. About a month ago, I went down and presented at ExxonMobil as part of their blockchain day. And so the companies listed here were actually just the ones that were there. So they were easy for me to say, yep, I know what these guys are doing. But there are a ton more. It could be its own thesis of, yeah, please go ahead.
You mentioned about the 30 days and the 90 days and the 60 days. But how much cost goes into the inventory? In other words, once it's brought out, the gas is brought out of the ground, it has to be stored. And do one of these companies handle it separately from everybody else? And what the percentage of the inventory costs are?
Yeah, so the question was just around thinking about inventorying of natural gas and how to sort of think about that here you are storing the commodity itself. So I guess my answer in that is it really is just one source of value now in storage. Generally, it is another third party that runs that storage field. So another person who needs to be paid for their services that they contribute. But it's also the case that for most storage fields, they're never really static. There's always molecules flowing in and flowing out, and sometimes at the same time, just from different locations. It's all supply and demand, absolutely.
That's why in the summertime they store it, in the wintertime they sell it.
Yeah, store in the summer to use in the winter. So yeah, energy storage is, whether you're talking batteries or you're talking about natural gas underground, it's all part of the system, it's all part of the value chain. And it just emphasizes how complex it can be because there are all different types of contracts and transactions underlying the different technologies or applications. So key message here, there's a lot of companies figuring out where within the value chain for energy they can make an impact. And frankly, I don't know a lot about most of these companies. So I have not fashioned myself or invested the time to really say, hey, which ones of these make sense, which use cases make sense. Because most of these are going to be built on, there's 3 examples here of Solana, Ethereum, and then Energy Web Token. As these are other blockchains that you can build smart contract features on. That's primarily what these companies are using as their technology stack, if you will. So does that make sense when I say like the technology stack? This is where they're going to say, this is the blockchain I want to use. I want to use Ethereum. So that kind of leaves Bitcoin sitting down here where I even drew a line to say it's different. Because none of the companies that are doing energy and blockchain today are using Bitcoin. And then there's a reason for that. Well, Bitcoin is proof of work, and all the other ones are proof of stake. And so to kind of unpack that a little bit more, when you think about Bitcoin versus the other cryptocurrencies that are out there, you might want to start with just thinking about this trilemma. It's the scalability trilemma. And what the scalability trilemma lays out is that when you're approaching, building your own blockchain, if you will, if you're evaluating the existing ones, you have to think about where they made compromises. And in the case of Bitcoin, it chose to compromise scalability. So when you are moving Bitcoin, or you want to transact in Bitcoin, you can only do 7 transactions per second. Now, that may not mean, what does 7 transactions per second mean? But think about Visa, which can do tens of thousands of transactions a second. Think about, and that's not even a blockchain, but you could think about, Ethereum or some of the other ones, they can do tens of thousands of transactions per second. So if you're trying to think about, well, how am I going to reform an entire industry, 7 transactions per second is not going to cut it. It's not fast enough. There's more than 7 people in this room. We all couldn't pay our bill at the same time. So not really useful. But where Bitcoin really shines is security and decentralization. So those things matter because from a security standpoint, well, nobody's going to trust anything if their money can be stolen. So that's sort of a baseline thing to say, hey, if I put money into something, I want to make sure it's going to be there tomorrow. Like nobody can take it from me. So I think everybody would understand why security is very important. But decentralization is also really important, and it's something that I think gets underemphasized in a lot of the conversations around cryptocurrencies. But decentralization is really speaking to the fact that there's no one central entity that can control Bitcoin. There's no CEO that you can call up if you're not happy with how things are going, because it really is sort of a network of the people. Anybody can participate in the network at any scale that they want to participate. And it was actually designed such that it will keep pace with computers. So you can run a Bitcoin node in your home with just off-the-shelf equipment. Increasingly, some of those other blockchains, that's becoming less tenable because of the complexity, because of the data requirements. So Bitcoin was designed to be the most secure network in the world, which I make a case it is in the dimensions that are relevant for what we're talking about. And then it's designed to be the most decentralized. So it compromised scalability. Now, that's a choice. So you're writing software, it's a choice of how you want to implement it. So then we kind of go over and say, well, one of the choices made was this proof of work concept. This basically means that in order for you to participate in consensus, so consensus means that when you're talking about blockchains, what ultimately is going to be an approved transaction, a validated transaction in that blockchain, everybody needs to be in consensus that, yep, transaction A, B, and C, those are the only ones that should exist there. Those are the amounts. So that's kind of consensus. It's agreeing on what does the blockchain say. For Bitcoin, you have to actually provide computing power to do that. And as we all know, when you're running computers, they consume electricity. And so that's sort of the arc of things, is that because Bitcoin made a choice to be really focused on security and decentralization, and they adopted a proof of work consensus mechanism, well, Bitcoin needs energy to run. And so let's talk a little about the energy. This will be kind of quick. It's a lot of energy. When you put Bitcoin up, it's still less than Christmas lights, but it's a lot of energy. But when you actually kind of think about it in the global context, the amount of energy directed today towards Bitcoin mining is about 0.2%, give or take. That's sort of what the best estimates are. So it's a lot of energy in terms of gigawatts and terawatt hours, but in the grand scheme, it's still pretty small. I do expect it will continue to grow. It will be a larger and larger percentage over time. But what I wanted to talk about here is well, what does that energy consumption look like? So on the left-hand side is actually, this is my basement. So I'm consuming some energy to mine, to participate in mining Bitcoin. But I also get supplemental heat from that because it's a computer and it runs hot. So my entire basement is heated off that one little machine. So it's not that the energy is all just going to the computing. I'm actually getting a secondary benefit from that, if I took the time, I could build the economic model and see, hey, this actually has 2 benefit streams to me, and they both have value. There are people doing this to, setting up Bitcoin farms and drying out, drying meats? I couldn't think of jerky, So there's people doing that. There's people heating greenhouses now. So people are saying, hey, I can mine Bitcoin, which generates revenue, and I can now use the supplemental heat for other purposes. So that's one thing. Then this has become a much rapidly growing area, is people that are using waste natural gas, whether it's off of a landfill or it's at wells in West Texas. They're using that waste natural gas to mine Bitcoin. And that has a methane emissions benefit because whether you're flaring natural gas or in some cases just venting the natural gas to the atmosphere, that's not good from a climate change perspective. So if you can run it through a really efficient generator, create power, and then mine Bitcoin with it, again, double benefit being achieved. And so this has actually been called out by a recent White House report as, this is sort of climate negative when you think about the impacts that this is having. And then on the other side, we're kind of moving up in terms of scale. You now have these grid-connected, these large Bitcoin mining farms, which are football fields upon football fields of computers. And what's happening in Texas is the best case for this, is you have this flexible price-sensitive load. So Bitcoin miners are consuming energy when the wind is blowing and energy is cheap. And so if you are a company that is in the business of generating energy from wind power, you really like the Bitcoin miners because previously there was nobody to take that power and you were having to maybe sell it at a loss or at a discount. Now a Bitcoin miner comes in and sets a price floor and says, well, hey, I'll always pay you 2 cents if you sell it to me. And they'll give them the option to say, hey, but if the market prices are high, you can turn us off and send it there. So what you have in Bitcoin miners is the most flexible price-sensitive customer on your system, which if you know electrical systems, that's a huge advantage to have, is somebody who will run continuously but turn off the moment you tell them to turn off. And they ultimately help sort of smooth out pricing and load across the whole grid. So providing services beyond just mining Bitcoin, they're providing services to the energy system in different ways and shapes. But the key is when we think about security and decentralization, so it's all just the application, proof of work, the mining process, they're contributing to that security, contributing to that decentralization. And you may look at a site that's big like that and contrast it with a site like my basement. Again, that's just it's a manifestation of that decentralization because I'm participating in my own way to the network just as a mega facility is. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and this really hits on sort of a broader theme that relates to Bitcoin is, well, how is the energy consumption being distributed today? So this is a recent map. It shows that, hey, the US, Canada, Russia, China, and Kazakhstan are actually the global leaders, and they account for over 80% of the energy use for Bitcoin mining today. But what is important to see is that it truly is, there's participation across the world. So again, back to that concept of decentralization, we're talking about a blockchain that is not existing only in one country or in one part of the world. It's east, it's west, it's north, it's south. It's being decentralized. One of the interesting points on this is that China actually banned Bitcoin mining almost 2 years ago. So they said no more Bitcoin mining is allowed in the country. But you can see China still is contributing 21% of the power draw for it. These are estimates, but the key thing is that also sort of speaks to the resiliency of what we're talking about here. I would encourage anybody to, as a thought exercise, go check out Jason Lowry. He is, takes this and sort of thinks about the future projection of power, within Bitcoin mining and how that's going to be part of the arsenal of any country as they think about their war-making abilities. But coming back to a more interesting sort of peaceful side is actually a whole other angle. So here's one side of Bitcoin mining is consuming energy, and the questions that exist around the impact that that's having. But there's a whole other side of the equation where Bitcoin mining is actually incentivizing energy development. And we know this because we're doing it. So when you think about, and we just recently published a paper about it, but what we're often talking about is if I were to go into sub-Saharan Africa today, and we're working in Nigeria and Cameroon right now, but the average price that you put a new mini-grid into a remote community in Nigeria, that mini-grid, because there's the people living there didn't have a lot of appliances, already. They've got maybe a few LEDs, a few cell phones to charge, but nobody there has electric rice cookers yet, or any of those other sort of large consuming appliances. The economy is now just starting to get legs on it now that there's electrification. So what do you do if you're the company that's putting up hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars to build this mini grid when you don't really have any customers? So that is an age-old problem that has existed in emerging markets. It's why it's so slow to get people access to electricity. And even when you do get them access, it still costs a lot because this company is trying to take a lot, the company that built the microgrid is taking a lot of cost and trying to now spread it over a small number of customers. So economically, it's not a very good setup. What we're doing with Bitcoin miners today is we're sending the Bitcoin miners to exist within those mini grids from day one. And they will basically be the buyer of last resort, or they'll be the anchor tenant, if you will, on the system. And they will take as much of energy as is available to take, not take anything away from the community, but just whatever is in excess. And so you've essentially taken something that was generating very little revenue, is a high-risk operation, and now you've de-risked it by putting an energy consumer there. And it's an energy consumer that coincidentally makes their revenue every day, so they can be a very reliable partner. And so the economics, this is illustrated in the paper, is you go from 49 cents per kilowatt hour to now 24 cents because you've now spread those costs out over more people. Now you may say, well, wait, why is the impact miner only paying 4 cents? Well, it's because it was excess electricity, so it was just going to be wasted. So you try to find a number that both sides can say, hey, this works for us economically, and then it's really a win-win-win where the community gets a better power price, the grid the investor gets their project de-risked, they get a faster return, and then the Bitcoin miner gets to mine Bitcoin profitably. So that is one way that you'll see more and more. And actually, there's a company that just raised $2 million funded by Jack Dorsey and the Block Group was sort of principal among that. This is really sort of an interesting area to think about as we talk about electrifying emerging markets. Okay, so on this next one, I wanted to now go back and answer the question of, well, I've been saying all these nice things about Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, it's still only 7 transactions per second. How does this create value? So let me first say, hey, on this right-hand side, while the video is still playing, this is an actual sort of snapshot of what's called the Lightning Network. And so all of the dots, those are nodes, and then all the things connecting them, they are channels. Why I put this on here is not that you can actually extract anything out of there, except it's a really cool visual, but it just shows that, hey, when we think about the future, it's distributed networks. It's people being able to join this network, voluntarily and not needing anybody's permission to join it. Those are the kind of the cool things about this. And it's very dynamic. But now let's apply that concept. So we've got Bitcoin sitting here, 7 transactions per second, very slow. What's it going to be doing? And we can put that side by side with the dollar. And then right above that, we can think about what are payment networks. So actually, the dollar itself, like a physical dollar, doesn't move that fast. If I want to pay Daniel, I got to walk over there and hand it to him. That may be pretty quick, but there's a reason why we build networks on top of the dollar to then have banks and credit cards. They're all in communication to move money. So it's not really a terribly foreign concept to say, hey, you've got a base currency, and then you have networks that sit on top of that to help it move quicker. And so what's happened in the Bitcoin space is about 5 years ago, a new protocol came out called the Lightning Network. And it started off pretty small, but in the last year or two has really picked up and gained momentum because it is now quickly being positioned as a direct competitor to these other payment networks because it can move money, it can move Bitcoin cheaper, faster, and more securely than the incumbents today. So this is happening very fast, and so now you have this rock solid foundation in Bitcoin, most secure, most decentralized, and now you're adding the scalability component. You're not changing any of the properties down here. Bitcoin will always be decentralized and secure, but now you're giving a scalability opportunity. And so that's where we as a company sit, is we're building right on top of that. So we're taking this scalability layer and we're saying, how can we use this to now change how we pay for energy? And the short answer is you just connect the two. You connect the energy industry, the meters on your house or your business, and you connect it directly to the Lightning Network. So today when you think about how a utility pays you, it's going, or how you're paying your bill for utility, think about they have to read the meter, generate the bill, send it to you. I could name the 8 departments that get involved in that process, but there's a lot of back office touches and a lot of accounting adjustments that have to go along the way. What we're talking about is all of that goes away. It's now fully automated, fully integrated. The payment network, which is also helps move the data is now directly integrated with the physical. So physical, financial data are all now just in one stack together. And so this slide was, basically our pitch deck, but you would imagine this being over 5 slides. So a lot of information condensed here. But the key point I want to make was what I just said. So hey, it's this integration. But you can think about all of the physical nodes of the energy system. So every generator is a node on the system. If you walked into your utilities control room today, you would see all the physical nodes up on the wall. They're all connected to each other. That's how the energy moves. So just imagine if there was then just another layer on top of that, which is what we're building, where you have all the physical aspects of the energy system have now their own financial, smart node to now move money as well. So the vision that we're creating for the future is when energy moves, money can move. And so as you're consuming energy in your house, you can now be paying your bill. Why this is good is because it solves that cash flow issue that we started with about paying for your bill 60 days later. So that can all go away when we start to have better cash flow within the industry, and we now start to bring down a lot of the overhead and excesses that ultimately drive up cost. So not going to kind of go crazy deep in there, but just imagine this future state where you now can have transactions that are automated, secure, frictionless, and the entire energy system now starts to take on a synchronicity of the 3 things that we began with: energy, data, and money. So be happy to follow up after this to kind of talk any more about this. The one question I always get is, well, shoot, do I need to use Bitcoin? So this is a key question. Short answer is no. So the way that technology is moving is there's easy means of on-ramping and off-ramping funds. And what I mean is dollar to Bitcoin, Bitcoin to dollar. So today we already are integrated with third parties that do that for us. So you can sort of think about our system as one that allows you to cut out the back office of the energy system, allows you to cut out the financial intermediaries, the payment processors, because ours is purely a peer-to-peer system. So briefly, so we're as I kind of started this off, very early stage, but we're rocking and rolling. We've got some partners in Africa as well as, doing some commercial work here in the States. And then I'll conclude with, I start off by saying, hey, there's no companies that presented at Exxon that were talking about Bitcoin. I was the only one there that had Bitcoin technology at the forefront. But there are some really interesting companies in the space, some of them using the technology, some of them mining Bitcoin. But great examples of where this innovation is heading. So I'd encourage folks to take a look at these companies as well. And that's it. So I'm available. There's my email. Twitter and Telegram work too. And that's all I have to say. Thanks so much for your time.
Jump into a Q&A. A couple quick, or actually just one quick rule. I'm going to walk around with this microphone so everyone in the room can hear the question, so we can all benefit from what Austin is trying to say. But I'll start off with, I think, an easy question to answer, but to be uninformed, we're all seeing negative headlines in the news about the value of crypto, and we're just wondering, or I'm wondering, how does the value of crypto feed into what Synota is trying to accomplish, and how does it affect or how does it not affect what you're trying to do?
Yes, that's a great question. So, I'm sure folks in the room have heard of FTX. They've seen sort of this massive collapse of a cryptocurrency exchange and the fraud behind it. And it's, frankly, it's not the first fraud even this year, or even, within the last 12 months, within the space. So there's definitely bad actors. So I think that the first thing to think about is that, what are the ways in which, as a company, specifically, how do we demonstrate that we're different? So, it starts by not doing, reimbursements, via emoji, like FTX was doing. So like it's building the right governance and processes. So of course, as a company, that's what we're going to be focused on is, everything we do transparently, having the right, governance and processes in place so that when we talk to our investors, talk to our customers, we can say, this is who we are, on paper, top to bottom. We are who we are. FTX couldn't do that, and it's just a shame that people didn't press and want to look under the hood. But specifically about the technology, so it also just affects perceptions generally in the space. And what I would say is that the key thing about the way that our software works is we actually, we are not subject to the price of Bitcoin changing. So we don't hold Bitcoin for the purpose of our software. We don't speculate on it. We use Bitcoin for a teeny tiny fraction of a second when it's moving across the network. So we use it as a medium of exchange. And so the sort of tangent to that is when you think about a currency, there's three things that define a currency: store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. And when you have all three of those things, you have a legitimate currency. You can point to Bitcoin today and go back to that 7 transactions per second and say, not really great as a full-fledged currency. There are definitely pockets where it is all three of those things, but not at scale. It is certainly, as a store of value, enough people own it and hold it to qualify that one box gets checked. So we are definitely in the camp of, we are now building out Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. We're a Bitcoin technology company. So we're not speculating. Actually, most days I don't even know what the price is. So it's just, that's who we are. So we're very different. And I think that really adds to why people were excited about sort of our approach, because we don't have that we have a very different mindset and business plan.
Any other questions from the crowd? Yeah.
Yeah, what's the risk factor with Bitcoins with the government thinking about changing the rules, or making rules?
So what I will always say is that, yes, the government could make our business model no longer work. Synota specifically as a company. So they could make it impossible for us to do business. I think the example, but I don't think that overall that's going to have a material impact on Bitcoin. For the same reason that China banned Bitcoin mining, but there's still over 20% of the Bitcoin miners are located there. It's very tough to shut something down when it's as decentralized as Bitcoin is. So it is the only fully decentralized thing, and so anybody that participates in the network does it voluntarily. And so if I voluntarily choose to put a Bitcoin miner in my basement, how's the government going to stop me unless they go further up the supply chain? But they don't know that's what I'm using the electricity for. If I decide to download the software and run a full node, they can't stop me from doing that necessarily unless we've kind of gotten to a place, I guess, in government overreach that we may all feel pretty uncomfortable if they're telling me things that I can and can't download, to my own personal computer. So I guess the short answer is, I wish I'm not giving you the short answer, but I'll give it to you now. It is something that is in the back of my mind. The government obviously can make things. They can make my business not exist. They can make life hard. I don't think any one government, actually I know for a fact, no one government can bring Bitcoin to an end. It's too decentralized.
Your exhibit said China.
Yeah.
Government does get involved.
Yeah, so they banned it, but it didn't work out so well. So China used to actually be closer to 50%, but they banned it over a year and a half ago. So there's been plenty of time to shut things down, and they're still at 21%, and they're holding steady.
The government shut down the coal industry in the United States, coal-fired power plants.
True?
Yeah, I'm just saying, the government has a lot of authority.
Yeah, they can.
And what the bad part is that we're the government.
Yeah, it's interesting too, though.
Not the guys that are running, we're the government.
By the people, for the people. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So I have two questions for you. First, does your software connect to the meter, or how do you connect to the customers? Because from what I understand, it's a pay-as-you-go service, as you're using the electricity, you're paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
And second, on the side of the utilities, because as customers right now, we pay to the utilities. So do you partner with utilities, or how are they open to your approach?
Yeah, great question. So, when you think about in the U.S., there's around 125, 130 million smart meters already deployed. So these are digital meters that give the utility and other people, other stakeholders, real-time access to the amount of energy being consumed. And that's just on the electric side. So the gas side, you're going to see over the next 10 years a giant push to digitize all of the gas meters in the United States. And so you have the data that's available there. It's a question of, well, what are they doing with it? What's interesting is that the electric meter push really happened over the last 10 years. And today, only 3% of electric meters are being used to provide additional products and services beyond what they provided when they were just analog. So think about that. So we have all this data. We have all, so much information that can be used, and almost no utilities are using it. So that's an issue because there's immediate benefits that could happen with things like real-time pricing and et cetera. So this is a long way of saying we're able to integrate directly with existing meters. So some of them you can do APIs directly off the meter. Some of them you need to hit, a utility database. We're going to get very good as a company at multiple ways to access information coming off of energy meters. And so our whole thing, though, is we want to use the existing hardware that's out there because as a nation, as a world, we've already spent tens of billions of dollars on these meters. Let's figure out how to make them smart, actually. And so then when you think about the utility, so there's a lot to say there, but the key thing is utilities have incentive to reduce their operating O&M expense. Utilities have a business model that's part O&M, part capital, and the way that utility wins is moving as many out of their total spend, having the biggest piece of pie possible being capital. So our software comes in and says, hey, we can take the O&M side and shrink it down even more. So from a initial business case perspective, it's like, okay, I like this. You want to save me money. My regulators want me to save the customers money, so okay, we're checking that box. But then it does go into, well, what are the other things other services that can be provided? So absolutely with our software, it'll make it much easier to roll out a real-time pricing to every customer. Whereas today, that's a data management problem for the utility. With our software, it's no concerns. The other thing is you can think about is a utility has to worry about providing benefits to their low-income, no-income customers. And this is one of the things I love to talk about is because what people don't realize is that a majority of the benefits that are available to low-income, no-income people to pay for their energy are going unused. So it's a weird system of incentives, but the bottom line is it's a pain in the butt if you are low-income, no-income, and you have the right to use government benefits to pay for your energy. You better dedicate a half a day every month to getting those benefits. And people don't do that, so they go unused. And the reason that there's not a more efficient way is because of fraud. How are you going to know how much to contribute to that person to help offset their energy costs? So with a system like ours, you can you can eliminate that concern because now we can have benefits that have a sole purpose for them to pay for electricity. And so all of the potential fraud goes to zero. Now you can directly distribute benefits in a very efficient way. Things that are way down the road, but when it comes to us talking to a utility, we think having worked there, we've got a lot of the right things. It's just how do we sort of frame up these benefits and understand how this will integrate with the technology stack.
Yeah, it sounds as though your software is not using blockchain throughout the value chain, energy production and all that. It's not operating in the real world yet. Is that the case? Or are you doing pilots in certain areas, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we've done the pilots. Now we're moving to do our first commercial project. Hopefully this quarter will get wrapped up. Maybe push a little bit in the next quarter. But yes, the software is there. Now we just have to put all the pieces together for a customer and begin. Next time I come here, we'll be generating revenue. Sort of stage is where we're at. But you did say something that I think is interesting to emphasize is that why our software is different is that not every transaction is being recorded on the blockchain because we are in that second layer. So the way that Lightning Network works is it optimizes the interaction that you have with Bitcoin's main blockchain. So that 7 transactions per second is no longer a constraint that will concern you. So we can do 1,000 transactions before we finally need to actually put one onto the blockchain. And so that's how we are able to be a blockchain-based solution, but provide smart contracts in a much more efficient way is the way to think about it.
Can I just follow up with one more? I know. Yeah, I just have a project I'd like to talk to you about.
Perfect.
So I run a nonprofit that is working with another nonprofit called the Land Art Generator Initiative, and they go around the world holding international design competitions to build works of public art that generate renewable energy. And they've done about a dozen of these in different cities. They usually get submissions from 80 countries. We're working on doing that here in Pittsburgh on the riverfront, the Allegheny Riverfront in downtown. And we have a number of local partners too. We want the thing, so this would be probably a large solar, wind installation, maybe a draw some power from the river. And we want the power to be kind of equitably distributed, as well as the jobs or any other, aspects of the economics of this thing. And I was wondering if you'd like to have another model or do something.
Yeah, let's talk.
And discuss that, because I'm really interested, especially in the equity, aspects of what you're talking about. And maybe there'd be other ones that you could tell us about, other ways to help promote that with a project like this. Thank you.
Absolutely, that sounds great.
Hi. First of all, I think you're sitting on a gold mine. I'm extracting maybe 10 to 15% of what you've said, but what I've heard is very, very comparable to what I've gone through. Okay, back in the 80s, you're dealing with the energy industry, we were dealing with the telephone industry. And we integrated raster and vector technology, which may sound like, kind of trivial, but it was very significant at the time, and it basically impacted their billing cycle. They went from 6 months of billing for the phone companies, okay, to 4 days. And it made all the difference in the world, and I think you're hitting a home run.
Thank you. One of the things that is, we have yet to come across the CFO that doesn't say they want better cash flow for their business. And I think that that's going to be what we can sell as the vision, but it's going to be, to your point, we're going to have to really show tangibly how does that come. Go ahead.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
It took us 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay, we hit a home run, but it took us 5 years. I cannot emphasize how important marketing is. To be able to get your message down to the lowest common denominator, understandable by all. And I would urge you to do that. Whatever you spend on marketing will
Not
be
enough.
money well spent.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and I'll tell you, having had a lot of these kinds of conversations, I've sort of geared myself up for 5 to 10 years, to really start getting traction or getting sort of at scale deployments, where you're paying your energy bill using our software. There's the good thing about the energy industry though is that it's very diverse in terms of the types of transactions that occur. There's a lot of private transactions actually that occur. So that's our starting point, is where do we face sort of the fewest number of hurdles to adoption. But as we move forward, we'll enter more and more of the regulated spaces where new challenges, new opportunities.
Anybody else?
Hi, great talk.
Thanks.
I was wondering if it's not necessarily about company, but you talked about the value add of Bitcoin mining on a grid scale.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could explain that a little bit more, because you're adding load that wasn't there before, and these scarcity prices are going to happen whether or not you add in a flat load or not. So I was just wondering if you could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing, so the question, gets you to okay, well, first of all, start with the incentive model for Bitcoin miners. The cost of electricity is the biggest input to their economics. And so when you're a rational company, you're going to say, well, in order for me to make the most profit off of my business, I need to find the cheapest electricity. So keep that in mind, that a Bitcoin miner is not going to mine Bitcoin if the price of electricity is too high. So what actually attracted me to the Bitcoin mining space, I was passively investing in Bitcoin, just because I thought it was interesting. But what really sort of lit my fire was when I saw Bitcoin miners and how they were actually thinking about the economics in a broader sense, and thinking about our energy system in the broadest sense. So not only were they wanting cheap power, but they were actually willing to adjust their operations to get it. And so I had spent my career working on how to make the value chain more efficient, and these guys were just saying, screw the value chain, I'm going right to the source. And they were locating their operations right next to power plants because they didn't want to pay the transmission company, they didn't want to pay the utility. They said, I'll just pay the guy that generates the power. Now, that's one sort of manifestation of how this industry's gone, but it was, for me, kind of light bulbs, because they figured it out. They said, hey, as an energy economy broadly, we have to start being more dynamic. We have to start thinking about what is the true cost to provide energy to somebody's home or business, and then make sure that that's then close to the price they're going to pay for it. Today, when you think about, and so Bitcoin miners understood that, because they were saying, I want to get the true cost of energy, and I won't stop searching until I find it. And so that, immediately took out a whole section of the energy suppliers, like they're not economic. But that optimization is something that you see in this industry that now is going to become part of a broader movement. We all know it. We have smart appliances, smart thermostats. Our entire system is going to get smarter, but as I use the example of having digital meters, the utilities aren't doing it. Like, that's just the simple matter. I've worked for them, they're slow, love the people, they do a lot of things well, but like, it's not gonna happen overnight. This is where Bitcoin miners, I think, leading by example and just showing people that, hey, here's how we can all be dynamic and work together. That's where you start to just, I think, drive the innovation forward and faster. I've seen more innovation in Bitcoin-related control technology than in the last year than I think in anything I've seen in any other industry. Just like people want to be able to control those machines on a drop of a notice based on a price signal. And that's exactly what we want our thermostat to do too. It's just that's not there yet in a decentralized way. Google can tell you that, but it's not sort of in existence in a distributed way. It's sort of the technology for doing that kind of stuff. So it's a long-winded way to say, first and foremost, Bitcoin miners are de-risking, are proving by doing. And I think that there's a lot under the hood when you see how they've come into this industry and found cheap power. When it comes to the actual grid services, I would point you to just most recently in Texas, because during that cold spell right around Christmas time, a giant percentage of the overall Bitcoin hash rate came off the network for a period of time, shutting down to basically conserve power in Texas. Now, what you have to ask is, well, what are they doing? So in that case, they weren't running, they weren't consuming energy when the broader grid needed it. So that makes sense. But really what matters too is, well, what happens in the other 99% of the year? What Bitcoin miners are doing is they're helping set a price floor. So they're helping provide stability to energy developers who, especially in West Texas, are often selling wind energy at a loss. And it's only because of the government subsidy that they can still turn somewhat of, make the economics work. So they're coming in and they're setting this floor. I gave Daniel an example earlier. There is one of the companies we're working with has signed a power purchase agreement with an entire nuclear energy facility. Like, they're going to mine Bitcoin from the entire output of one nuclear plant. That's pretty remarkable. Like, why would that even work out? Well, think about a nuclear power plant. Their economics work when they can run continuously. So shutting down, ramping up, ramping down, not good for a nuclear plant. They like to produce an even output throughout the day. Well, now that we've had more variable sources of energy come onto the grid, there are now times in the day when the nuke plant is losing money, times in the day when it's making money, but it's very lumpy. And they were looking at the future picture and saying it's only going to get lumpier. So they know that, I'll use a number, if they can sell power at 2.9 cents, they make their minimum margin on the power. They are a profitable nuclear plant. The Bitcoin miner says, hey, at 3.3 cents, I'm profitable. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. And so what's happening is nuclear plants are figuring this out, Bitcoin miners are figuring this out. They're both finding where their break-even prices are, and they're figuring out what's the opportunity zone in the middle, and they're meeting there. And so what it's doing is it's setting a floor for the revenue of the nuke plant. So now they can now be better economics, both short-term and long-term. And the Bitcoin miner as well benefits, because the Bitcoin miner will still shut down if power prices are high. They'll let the nuke plant sell back onto the grid. But for all those other hours of the day, the Bitcoin miner is going to take that electricity. So it's just, that's happening because it's enhancing the economics. So it's not, I won't say anything in the energy system is going to be black and white, it's all wins. There are definitely some losses. But I think holistically, both in terms of the change in mindset, the driving of the technology, but then just in immediate grid services, most recently illustrated in Texas, where the case studies kind of flew out next day of like, this is exactly what the Bitcoin miners in Texas did. They've been providing revenue to these energy suppliers 364 days of the year, and then the one day they were called to shut down, they did, and all that power went to the people. So it's a good thing. It's not optimized today, but that's why I like this industry, is they're optimizing very quickly.
So unfortunately, we're at the hour. I'm gonna ask just one last question, if anybody has one final question. If not, Austin's gonna be hanging around for a couple minutes afterwards, so please, if you have other questions, come on up, meet Austin, shake his hand. But anyway, Austin, thank you so much for being here to give this talk. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Thank you for the question.